approve those.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Kim. Second? Somebody second? Carrie, thank you.
I was unmuting to say I didn't actually get a chance to read the minutes, so I won't
Okay.
vote. but
Okay, all
I
right.
apologize.
No worries. I assume I can second since I did review them, and all in favor. And thank you. Anybody opposed? Great. Okay. So, Tara, maybe one of the things that I had identified to Tara in looking at this was, I know that with the legislative session being very close at this point, that I think we'd want to carve out some time to talk again today about the priorities. And I know we talked about that at the at our broader meeting as well. And then also one of the follow-up items was identified from the continuing long list of areas of opportunity with regard to education and training and workforce development was around the our registered behavioral tech role, and what does that requirement actually look like for DSS. And you know, what I tried to do a little bit of research on what programs currently exist for training of individuals, and really what I found was only online programs. I certainly did not spend an hour researching this, but Tara, I don't know, you had mentioned that you were able to pull some information. If you're able to start that discussion off.
The updates that Jennifer was referring to are part of the state plan amendment. So that is currently in process. So the big thing is that they're, you know, looking to, you know, increase some workforce development, you know, by reducing some of the criteria for a behavior technician. So that is part of a state plan amendment and being reviewed by DSS.
So when I looked, and I could be, you know, I could have not done it because I didn't do a thorough review. It obviously says you know, a degree, a bachelor's degree is not required. It also indicates the requirement for the 40-hour RBT training, and then successful passing of the competency exam. So are those the only requirements that folks are aware of at this point? Can anybody speak to that?
That's for the like a board certified.
The RBT, the registered behavior tech. So that's what I looked at. I don't know.
So hold on one second. I can pull up I think I still have it.
Okay.
So the current.
Is that through the BACB that grants that? Like
That is, for a registered behavior technician, it is through the BACB, correct?
Okay.
But here's the current language for DSS. I'm just going to drop it in the chat because it's easier. I'm on my laptop, so it's hard to share screen. But for a behavior technician, if you look at where is it at? Page. I'll read it to you. Page 11 of that, it says that, oh, that's supervision. Sorry. Hold on. Qualifications. The technician qualifications is a minimum, must have a bachelor's degree from an accredited college or university in a behavioral health field, behavior analysis or related field, plus 1 year of full-time equivalent experience working with children with ASD, or have an associate's degree or equivalent number of credit hours with a passing grade from an accredited college or university in a behavioral health field, behavioral analysis, or related field, plus 2 years of full-time equivalent experience working with children with ASD. 18 hours of continuing education in ASD services in the last 3 years.
And Tara, that is for what role?
That is for that is for the behavior technician. That's the qualifications for a behavior technician under Medicaid
Okay,
for the autism spectrum disorder programs. So the ones that Jennifer reports out on.
okay, yeah. So that's interesting because when I looked at, so that appears, that's a much more stringent requirement than the RBT requirements that I looked at. So I think the terminology we have to make sure we identify carefully, but I could see why that would be very challenging.
Well, I think one of the things was that they didn't recognize the board certified RBT in those qualifications. So I think that's one of the things that they were updating to recognize someone who is an official RBT through the board certification.
So then is anybody aware of, I know that University of St. Joe's does the BCBA training, and Carrie does Southern as well?
Yeah, they call it an ABA program because of course they can't certify people as BCBAs. They have to go through the BACB, but yeah, and they do offer some training. I think that would kind of result in them qualifying with respect to the criteria for the RBT as well, because that's obviously a precursor or maybe
is it a certificate program or a bachelor's program?
The ABA sequence. I think you can, I'm not in that department, so I can't speak to it eloquently, but I think you can do it without getting a degree, but you also, so you can obviously meet the requirements without necessarily having to get like a master's degree, but they do have a master's degree with an autism concentration that I think, also would probably meet the criteria for then sitting for the exam and so forth. And then obviously the supervision is beyond that.
Are you talking about just the RBT certification?
Yeah, and you don't have to have for the RBT certification, you don't have to have a college degree.
You don't. You don't. You just need to you just need to take the required courses, which you can do online and you can do them for free. You need to have somebody sign off that you're competent in several competency areas. And then you need to apply and pass the RBT certification exam.
I'm sorry if I thought you were asking Lynn about the program at Southern. That's why I was being elaborative on that. So I apologize, Patrick. I wasn't trying to answer about the RBT specifically, but.
Oh, that's okay. I'm just trying to be helpful.
No, that's definitely helpful. I just want to offer a thought that it seems like, and I am probably a broken record in multiple arena here, but it seems like a lot of what we are identifying as qualified individuals are those with behavioral training and certification. While I think that's an important component, I'm not sure that it is sort of the panacea for what is a huge gap in terms of well-equipped and informed people working with individuals with autism. Yeah. So, the BCBA has the BACB has kind of become more, my understanding is they've become more stringent in terms of who they allow to now sit for that exam and kind of brand with that. But it wasn't always the case, right? Like you could just have a degree in anything and then, get some additional training and so forth. And I just wondered that it just seems like we're going more and more in the direction of behaviorists working with
Well, this
individual.
is specifically to deliver that service under Medicaid. So for that, you know, we would have to, you know, have those qualifiers in, you know, for the state plan, but the idea was to eliminate that college degree requirement so that providers could, you know, try to pull in somebody who's maybe a high school educated paraprofessional who also then has the, you know, has gone through the RBT training in order to increase the workforce specifically for that service. So I agree with you that overall, you know, as a broad brush approach, you know, that's not necessarily the only area, but, you know, definitely in getting service delivery to people in a timely manner, that's definitely something that, you know, we want to see at the state level, that we can, you know, get those services out to people, and that we're, you know, and it's a workforce issue.
Yeah, no, I understand that in terms of it being a workforce issue. I just think it's one fraction. So what other things are being offered in terms of, or being sought in terms of complementary and different pathways other than a behavioral approach? I'm asking that genuinely, like what else is there that's happening? Because I'm only hearing this.
As far as expanding services or getting services.
Workforce development and expanding services, those two primary things, right? What other kinds of training? What other kinds of workforce development pathways? What other kinds of service opportunities are available for not only people wanting to enter the workforce to work with this population, but also for the population seeking services? Like I'm just trying to zoom out for a much bigger, broader perspective here.
I mean, again, that's part of the issue with, you know, the system as a whole, you know, because we could talk about what DSS is doing for, you know, kids 21 and under. That's what this, you know, is doing. Krista may be able to fill us in on what DDS is doing to address, you know, people with autism in DDS services and supports. And then there's, you know, the ASD waiver specifically, which is again under DSS. So I think that that's part of, you know, the coordination effort that I'm specifically looking at, but not necessarily just related to workforce, but there are a lot, and then there's, you know, OEC that are, you know, working with people with autism. So I think that's what's hard, is to look at, you know, when you, and Brian could talk about the schools we're looking at, you know, if we go out too much, you know, then there's, you know, a lot of different state agencies involved and a lot of different people. So, you know, the last conversation, and we were just following up to close the loop on the last conversation that we had with Jennifer from Carolyn, who said that one of the things that she had heard was that they were addressing this one specific area to help with workforce for that specific service array. So I was just closing that loop to say, yes, it is part of a state plan amendment that is being reviewed to recognize RBT certification so that we can, you know, for those people implementing behavior programs under the supervision of a BCBA.
What's the timeline on that, Tara?
That I don't know. I'd have to follow back up with DSS to see where, you know, where specifically they're at in that state plan amendment, if it's been sent to CMS and is being reviewed by CMS. Or I know that that CMS is trying to do a lot of reviews and get things back to states now before administration changes. So you know, if it is with them, we might see it come back earlier. If it hasn't been submitted, then, you know, it could be a little bit more, you know, there could be some additional timing, but I can get a specific time.
Yeah, just curious about that. Okay. To your point, Carrie, I think, you know, we've talked about, when you look back at our last couple sets of minutes, we've talked about identifying, so that might be, you know, that RBT program, the training for that, and increasing throughput and getting to the goal of that status so that people can be out there delivering services, one piece. And that might be, then what I was looking at is who's doing it, how are we doing it? And that was helpful, Patrick, just to hear more about I did see the online training. I'm not aware of it. I'm sure people have done it. I'd be curious to sort of talk to somebody who's actually successfully sort of navigated that to see how we can maybe support others that I work with or that, you know, come into the conversation. But then we also talked about looking at what other programs exist out there in terms of best practice that we could hear about and replicate. And, you know, I wonder if to help kind of move us forward from discussion to more action items is if we identify some of those groups and ask them to come and do a brief presentation to this group so that we can learn more about it broadly and try to replicate it. I know that we get contacted often to do training from community-based agencies in completing the ADOS, for example, to, you know, work with schools in training paraprofessionals. So, you know, there's a lot of different levels of, I'll call them service providers. And I think all of them could be, you know, enhanced and expanded. And not that some of them require very formalized training and others of them are, like I said, with the school system is paraprofessional training. Are those the kinds of areas that you're thinking about, Carrie, just broadly?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter for me, it just, and again, maybe this is not the appropriate group in which to have this discussion, but to me, sorry, my daughter's trying to get my dog inside the house, so I'll stop talking for right now.
I mean, I can jump on because what Carrie was saying was resonating with me as well, and I'm with BRS, the Aging and Disability Services. You know, we don't, or it's rare that we would ever hire a behaviorist or a more clinical services like that. They're usually provided to our consumers from other means, but we have a serious crisis in our state and nationwide in our field on frontline, what we call job coaches. So it's people who are going into employment and helping people of all disabilities, including autism. It's a model we've used for 50 years. I mean, it's just been around forever. And we've never had quite this level of crisis. And we are working with it on the state and federal level, looking to solutions. I'd like to say we have one, but we don't. So I would very much love if this group, once we finish the work on the table about behaviors, if we could look at that, because we know that there's certainly an employment crisis for our population. And it is truthfully a part of the solution. It's not the only part. The second is to answer Kari's comment about training for individuals on the spectrum. That does fall under BRS's responsibility most of the time, but we don't usually send support into a post-secondary training with somebody. So it's helping, it's providing the voc rehab counseling to help somebody choose the right kind of career and then back into it about what kind of training you need to get there. And we offer funding for that for folks who are eligible. So I'd be happy to, at some other meeting, get into the weeds on that a little more if anyone's interested.
Thank you. Sorry, my dog's going to continue to bark outside, but at least my dog isn't yelling at her now. Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate you kind of jumping in and saying and offering that resonated with you too. I think, we can kind of maybe sort of parse out where the overlap is or where the distinctions are, but I just think that we ought to be looking, and I'm sure everyone is thinking the same thing. Like, we can't just look sort of narrow and deep. And I think that's unfortunately where we are right now, is that there has been this huge proliferation of BCBAs and everything behavioral, and a lot of folks, and I'm not trying to discount the value of that. I'm just trying to say, when I started in the field in the early 2000s, I didn't meet a BCBA when I worked in the schools or in I didn't even know those 4 letters ever strung together. Like, I didn't know that. We were doing as the school psychologists or folks in schools doing FBAs and behavior plans and so on and so forth. But that was a component of a more holistic view on what our students needed. And, you know, I think students grow up to be adults who also have, you know, complex and diverse needs. And so we ought to be thinking about them more, you know, diverse.
Comprehensively, right?
Comprehensively and holistically, right? And we've talked about that here before. I think too, as a mom, personally, if I think about what my nearly 17-year-old son needs, would I call in an RBT to do some of the things with him? Probably not, but maybe that's my ignorance, that I don't know what the skill set is of an RBT, or I have an idea of that I wouldn't necessarily think would map onto what his everyday needs are. But I do think there are lots of people who can kind of flex and bend and understand and be sort of fluid in applying their understanding of working with individuals. It's perhaps less, what I imagine would be less prescriptive than a typical behavioral approach. So that's where we've talked about things, I think, in here before. And again, I probably sound like a broken record, but in terms of equipping people with a general understanding and some strategies that they can then insightfully apply to the individual in front of them, right? So that, who knows what that is, but I think that there are ways of thinking about this in more sort of dimensional or dynamic.
I mean, being in healthcare, I think of it as an interdisciplinary team, right? And I just, in my mind, I'm just going down and, you know, I could recite for all of you, and you could too, all of the different disciplines that interact with individuals on the spectrum. And sometimes it might just be an occupational therapist, and they have the biggest impact because that's what that person needs. Or it might be, maybe it is a BCBA, or maybe it's a speech pathologist, who knows? I mean, all the things, thinking about social skills groups, right? When I again hear Yana speaking, to me, and the conversations that she has about being a highly functional individual, but still needing, if I can, from my take from her, still needing the support, and it's social skills support, and it's, programs like, Kathy, you must be familiar with, like Project Search, that's doing training of individuals. And we have several groups. We employ a bunch of individuals with job coaches here, right? So that's what, if you think of it, like what's the menu of services that can have an impact? And, some of them have very formalized training, and some of them are less so, and they all could be expanded upon.
I think, Carrie, what you said though is important, because I think historically there's been a philosophy of trying to, I'm going to use the word wean off of services, particularly related services, and BCBA, behavioral focused services. And and running transition programs, there's been this notion of lowering it and then working with transitioning into adult services. I'm recently experiencing working with some families who've I've kept in communication with, whose young adults have been asked to leave adult services as a result of their young adults having complex behaviors, and those providers really not having access to those qualified individuals who understand those behavioral needs. And that philosophy of what we don't have an OT or a behavioral technician or an BCBA who understand how to address those complex needs. So I know in one of the programs I support, we recently flipped that paradigm, and we did bring in an RBT who consults with the BCBA. And it has made a tremendous difference in our ability to address those sometimes what's seemingly like even low hanging fruit in terms of behavioral supports, because it makes a bigger difference when we can develop that sense of independence, or that's, for getting ready for competitive employment. because those behaviors are often the ones that prevent those things from happening. But again, thinking about transitioning to adult services, I think we need to do a better job of helping to align these services. And if we can't find the people, if we can't train the people, that's going to be a challenge. So Tara, I like where we're going, where we're really thinking through those qualifications, and whatever this group can do to leverage that, I think would be helpful.
I know, Len, at one point we talked about even just creating a list of,
Yeah.
you know, the different jobs, and kind of looking at, you know, even if it's, and again, I mean, this is education and training and where we can, you know, help the system, but, you know, should we be looking at, you know, creating some kind of career pathway, you know, for people who may be interested in working with people with autism or supporting people with autism, and that we could say, you know, to Kathy's point, here are some resources if you are interested in job coaching, or here are some, you know, resources if you're interested in. I think that, you know, I look back on my experience, and, you know, I started in college, answered an ad to be, you know, a one-on-one, you know, behaviorist for, you know, a young child with autism. And, you know, that really launched my entire career. And, you know, I've been in this career now for, you know, 20 plus years. So, I think that, you know, we just need to like look at, you know, if we want more people coming into the field, what are maybe some career pathways? And maybe that's what we could focus on, and you know, maybe put something out that is, you know, shows all the things that you can do if you have a high school diploma and you're interested in helping kids on the spectrum or adults on the spectrum, or, you know, these are all the careers that, you know, that are available to people if you have a bachelor's degree. You know what I mean? Like, so all of that kind of stuff. Because
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to take a stab because I think we probably have a lot of those programs and services, and maybe deliver that in advance of, you know, I visualize a chart, you know, just because I think about, you know, this is the role, this is the minimum education, you know, just list it out, right? And then we could all add to that and figure out, you know, what, and even have a, you know, a resource to say, these are the existing training programs, right? Or a resource link or something like that, that it could be a living document that we enhance and figure out. That's why I think we started the earlier discussion is, okay, this is one thing we know that's being changed or being considered for change that would get some people into the workforce. So that's not the end, but that's a beginning, right? So we start there and then we work through some of the more challenging lists, all the way up to and including obviously psychiatrists and appropriately trained psychologists, because we know that med management is, I mean, I can tell you our wait list is a year, and and you know, we are one of the only big providers of Medicaid services. So that's not okay. I mean, and, you know, what limits growth of services is really the appropriately trained personnel to do the work. And, you know, some things can't be, I don't want to say diluted because that has a negative connotation, but, you know, I can tell you, one of the things with psychiatry is APRNs and the very effective use of APRNs. And that's something that, I mean, we hired 2 psychiatrists many years ago, or 3. One moved to California, the other 2 remain, you know, but fingers and toes crossed, right? These are 2 people, but they've trained a ton of APRNs, and we continue to train. And that just exponentially has broadened the ability to have an impact. And I think that's what we have to look at. And how do we do that? That's just one area, but how do we do with that in other areas? It does take, you know, a willingness to make that commitment, because it's not, you know, it's not a funded program. It's something that's done, you know, as part of just organizationally building a workforce, not all of which we would keep, obviously, or be able to retain or think, I mean, we do our community service by doing that, but that's just one example. And I know there's others out there. I think it would be helpful if we could all kind of populate this because, and share what we all know anecdotally, or maybe it might prompt us to have conversations with other people about what they know. Like, I don't know everything about vocational training. I don't know much at all about it, but I do know people who do, right? That I could pull some of that information in. So
Yeah.
does that sound like a logical sort of next step for our meeting? Is our next meeting's in January?
Yeah.
Yes, yep.
No, Lynn, I like that idea. I know that, in a younger life, I spent some time in Massachusetts, and I know that, DDS in Massachusetts partnered with UMass to train undergraduates in a 3 or 4 course sequence to work directly with adults with developmental disabilities. And I know that there was a nonprofit in Massachusetts that worked very closely with one of the community colleges to train not only undergrads, but high school students.
Yeah.
In different capacities to support adults with developmental disabilities and other disabilities. So they are out there. Some of these smaller models are out there. It would be nice to be able to kind of identify them and learn from them.
Yeah, and try to replicate them, right?
Yeah, and I think our community colleges, the way they're currently now organized, this makes an easy partnership to, if we can identify the gaps, to work directly with them, because their workforce development program is amazing. I have found that their certification programs and their training programs, first of all, they're very affordable. And second of all, they really work very well in terms of trying to find the populations that can, really best be served by these certification programs, and then help work collaboratively with the organizations that hire. So they do both ends. They find the students, and then they work. Yeah, and then they work with us. Yeah.
Because a lot of the nonprofits will provide instructors.
Yes. And then we can really partner with them and develop what we need.
So hi, everyone. I'm Krista Ostaszewski from DDS. I don't speak very often in these meetings because I like to listen and use them as an opportunity to learn about some of the work that's happening. But I do think that this is a really great opportunity to maybe bring in some of our employment division staff and provide some really tangible examples about some of the work that's being done with individuals with intellectual disability. I think, Lynn, you mentioned Project Search. That is absolutely a wonderful opportunity for individuals to really become more involved in employment-based programs, but to learn what they're interested in and learn where they can be successful, and then really match them to that. We've got some really amazing success stories that I think would be interesting to talk through, but we're also really starting to focus in on internship opportunities and just opportunities for training individuals, but also making sure that employers have an opportunity to learn all the wonderful things that individuals with intellectual disability can bring to the table. So Tara, I think earlier in the conversation you mentioned maybe having an opportunity for folks to come in and present on different programs and arrangements. I think this would be a really great opportunity for our employment division to come in and just talk through some of those examples. So I oversee the waivers, so I'm always happy to think about things from a higher level, but when we get down to really talking specifically about some of those opportunities, I think that division would be a really great way to sort of just offer some options that are out there and talk a little bit about what we're looking for to do in the future as well. So thank you.
Great. Other thoughts? And I feel like at least this focuses us on a direction and puts it, whenever you can put it in front of you and begin to track it and identify where you know, we're gonna find areas where we think there are gonna be areas that have much more opportunity to be leveraged and some that really are gonna require, you know, a heavy lift. And I think starting with those things that we can, the areas that we can impact quickly, and then, you know, working more broadly, on the longer reach kind of, areas of focus. But like I said, I'm happy to take a stab at the first chart, and I'll send it over to Tara to distribute to the group. And we can just use it as a working document for everybody to populate, because I can just get ideas on paper and then we can go from there if folks are okay with that.
I also think, Lynn, it would be maybe important. One of the other things that was identified as a priority for the larger council for this session is requesting, you know, a statewide needs assessment that looks at trying to gather data from, you know, all of those people who are waiting for services and supports, whether it's, you know, children through, you know, those services through Medicaid, or, you know, private insurance, and they've been approved and they're still waiting for in-home supports and services. I think that, you know, and, you know, Krista, I know that you guys dealt with some of that too at DDS last year, and that people were approved for supports and services, but some of those services were not able to be delivered because of workforce issues and et cetera. So I think as we're thinking through, you know, making that request to fund a statewide needs assessment so we can better understand what people are really looking for and what services and supports they need. I think that identifying some of those gaps in, you know, workforce and or training is important too. So also I would challenge us to think about what questions could go on a survey that may get at, you know, I'm having a hard time identifying a psychiatrist in the community for medication management because they're not trained or don't have experience in autism. I'm having a hard time finding X, you know, because of that lack of expertise and or understanding, you know, of autism. So just you know, another thought to the group to think of, maybe if we can get this through and approved, what are some of those questions that if caregivers or people like Yana, you think of Yana, she wants somebody with experience who understands autism, who can be a mentor and peer specialist in the field. You know, that is, you know, she's said, you know, clearly that there's been people that she's worked with, but they don't always, you know, understand her or understand her needs or her experiences. So I think that that's important to think about too.
Do we have any data, you know, akin to what you're describing from folks who say are on the waiver presently, like the wait list presently or anything like that? Do we have those?
We have, Krista's smiling. We have like, it depends. So for DDS, they have a very robust, like information on their wait list. And they are planning for a lot of people and doing, you know, requesting in their budget years in advance, you know, and planning for those people who are aging out and, you know, coming into services and supports. So they would have like that would be only though for those people who would qualify for their supports and services that are known to the state. DSS, for the autism waiver specifically, when that program was started, it's just a wait list. It was just like, you know, it was first come, first serve. So they're working towards cleaning up that wait list and, you know, reaching out to people and trying to, and they have been reporting to the larger council on that. That's, if you recall, in our last meeting, I think they talked about how about 350 people have been eliminated from that wait list because they've, you know, they started doing some outreach, and those people may, for multiple reasons, maybe they moved out of state and they no longer need those supports and services. it's been multiple years, maybe they just don't need it, or maybe they qualified for DDS services somewhere along the way, and were never removed from that wait list. So they're working on trying to identify, but we're not always going to have that specific level of need information for the entire wait list, because we don't do all of those assessments. So each agency kind of handles that in a different way, and it's how that waiver was written initially. So, and then there's the whole lot of people who, are going through the education system that may not be transitioning into, those services that we don't maybe even know about yet. That, Kim and we've talked about this, people who are using, for example, private insurance. They may not be on a wait list. So we wouldn't necessarily know or be able to identify what those levels of needs may be.
I think that's gonna be one of the design challenges, is how do we, and I think it would be up to the consultant group that is used to do the study, is to identify how do you make sure that you cast the net broad enough, because if you ask a certain group, you're gonna get a certain group's
Correct.
opinion, right? And you may miss a very broad section of need, or overstate or understate just based on the population. So people do this for a living, they know how to do it, but I think, accessing, one of the things we see is just there's gonna be some very vocal families, and there are gonna be some very, when I say needy, families whose children or young adults or adults are very challenged, and they can't lift their head up to give us their opinion, but it's probably their opinion that we need the most. So I can think of a few ways of accessing it, but it wouldn't be all inclusive. And I think I think our design is really important, because we're going to get the information based on that. And we could make a left turn when we should be making a right.
Absolutely. And we did this in Pennsylvania, and we did
That's
it.
right.
Yeah, we did it multiple. So at one point we looked at just surveying the wait list, and trying to get some of this more, detail as we were looking to plan services and supports for people. But really what I'm more interested in is casting that larger net.
Yeah.
I would like to see, because I don't believe, although, DDS can look at, they have a good idea of what they're aging out, and, they're, all the people who are utilizing their services or waiting for, maybe a higher level of service. They have a good idea, but we're still only funding a certain portion of that, because there's still going to be a lot of people who are maybe waiting for, residential services and supports, for example. So I think that if we can cast that larger net, to see, and they did two. So they did a caregiver survey and one that individuals themselves would fill out, to try and get the whole lifespan spectrum.
Tara, would we also consider surveying providers
Yeah,
who
I would think
specify
about-
for this population? Just another perspective, and may also help us with that wider cast.
Well, because I think providers are gonna know the challenges to hiring and recruiting, maintaining, all of that.
So I just had a kind of spontaneous idea. I wonder if, there's the LEND program, right, through UConn. And each year they have to do projects that are related to, autism and other developmental disabilities. I mean, maybe we could look to partner with the USAID, and bring somebody in. Maybe one of the LEND students would be interested in doing a survey for providers to get some of this information on, where some of those workforce gaps are, for example.
I have a meeting tomorrow, an advisory board meeting tomorrow with them. I can make mention of it, Tara, and see if there's interest.
That'd be great.
Or maybe they would even be interested in doing the, because they're all speech and language pathologists, OTs, kids that are studying, Kim, correct me if I'm trying to remember who else. I know it's speech.
Early childhood, there's a variety.
Early
right,
child,
Right.
yep.
Pathology.
Variety of careers that they're, or majors
Mhm,
in that program.
mhm.
But because they have to do a project as part of their graduation, I mean, even if it doesn't happen for this year, I don't know where they're at in their planning process.
I don't know either.
Yeah, but maybe even next year, but even maybe creating that list as a first step of all of the different career choices, Lynn, for example, that we were talking about earlier.
Mhm.
Kim, that you could mention that too.
Yeah.
That may be something they could put together as well.
They would be a great partnership regardless because you're correct. They're often looking for projects, and we certainly have quite a bit of work that they could help us with. And I think I saw Carrie jumping in, so she may.
I thank you for acknowledging me, but I don't really, I was just gonna jump in and offer. I think that there used to be also, at least within the USID, if not Len students specifically, but there are also psychology students,
Right.
doctoral
Yeah,
students
because
that
we've
are
had
part
them
of
in the
that.
past, yeah.
Yeah, so they are always, I mean, those are folks that are writing dissertations. And so might be a really good dissertation project. I think it's a great idea, Tara, to reach out. And Kim, I think it's great that you have like a direct connection to where you could speak and in an informed manner about what it is. Although I'm sitting on this, I'm not sure I could speak in an informed manner, but you can.
So my apologies, guys, I have to jump off a few minutes early, but from my standpoint, so it sounds like we have at least a few takeaways in terms of getting maybe an update on timing of the state plan amendment, me putting together at least a starting list of different providers of service, I'll call it, for individuals with autism and starting to populate that. And then making the connection with Lend and potentially others around the needs assessment. I was thinking, all hospitals are required to do a community health needs assessment every 3 years, and we are on the cusp of having to redo ours. And as you can imagine, it's very different at our level of care, and we often partner with acute care hospitals around supporting the identified areas of need that they have. And I can tell you that we've started to track the number of adult referrals we're getting for our highest level of care, which we do not currently provide. And it's very significant. And so certainly the acute care hospitals are going to identify adults. And so there might be something too that we can do, in terms of how because it's something we have to do anyway, in terms of looking at services. And we have, I think I mentioned it to this group, a parent family advisory council that helps to inform some of our program development and across our continuum of care that might be able to be helpful as well. So I'll think that through a little bit more. It wouldn't be all inclusive, but it might be another aspect of it that could help inform what's needed. So, but sorry to jump off, guys. I apologize, and happy holidays to everybody. Thanks for participating.
Bye, Lynn.
Bye-bye.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.